Yep.
All right, we're live now. So I'd like to welcome everyone to Scottish Medieval and Tudor Romance, historically speaking. So I'm Jodi, Kendrick, and I'll be moderating this panel. And I would like to introduce our authors. So for everyone, I'll call on you just to cut down any interference. So I'd like you to introduce yourself, let us know who you are, what you write, and where you're calling in from. So I'll start with Marianne.
Okay, hi everybody. I am Marianne Morea, and I write mostly paranormal romantic suspense. But the reason why I'm here on the historic panel is because there is history in every single one of my books. Even I have ones that are time travel, but if it's not specifically time travel, in all of my books, the reader is taken back in time, especially like for my vampires, to find out who, what, when, and where, and how they ended up where they are here. For example, my book Condemned, which is backwards now. It was showing front ways before. Anyway, 1,200-year-old vampire was turned during the First Crusade. And it doesn't take you through all of his 1,200 years. I mean, obviously it takes place in modern times, but there is a center section of the book where you are back in time and you see how it happens. You're with him and feel everything that he goes through and the struggles. So history is a big thing. I like to say it's my jam, and I absolutely love it. It doesn't matter whether it's history that happened 40 years ago, which is relatively modern, or something that happened thousands and thousands of years ago. It touches my heart, it touches my creativity, and I hope I give it to you, and that my love of it shows through in every word that I write.
Great, thank you. Hildie, you're next.
Okay, well, hi, I'm Hildie McQueen, and I write medieval Highlanders, and I'm having such a blast with medieval Highlanders because just the history, like Marianne was saying, that comes along with it is amazing to me. I mean, you can get lost in that world, and the curiosity of how the heroes and heroines came to be in those times is what got me into the genre, and now just the discovery of the relationships and how they move forward in those times is just brings me in, and I'm just enamored with it. And so I'm hoping that like she said also, that my readers will not only enjoy the story and the adventures, but also fall in love with the characters and be rooting for them all along.
Great, thanks. Caroline?
Okay, I have a really hard time unmuting myself, so you're just going to have to, anytime you call on me, you have to give me 5 seconds. Hi, I'm Caroline Lee. I write history with heart. I write a bunch of different kinds of romance, a lot of westerns. I am relatively new to the Scottish genre in that I've only got about 10 Scottish books out right now. They're all medieval Scottish. I will say that my Highlanders, one thing you'll find from my books is that I have a thing for forearms, well-built forearms. I came to it, it was actually my first love. Medieval romance was my first love. It's why I got my degree in medieval history. I've got a master's degree in history. I love the time period, but when I actually started writing, I started writing Western Victorian period. So it was only last year, a year and a half ago, that I said, you know what, I'm going to go back, I'm going to start writing the medievals again. I'm going to set them in Scotland because kilts. Hildie has a really great line about cowboys and Highlanders being the sort of the alpha, sexy, wonderful men we love to love. And I agree with that. I think that that's why I decided to set my medieval books in Scotland, because kilts.
Great, thanks. Kathryn.
Well, I have over 100 published medieval novels. I just published my 107th this week. I do not publish Highlander. Let me take that back. I'm strictly medieval knights. So we're talking medieval English romance. And as we talk about men in kilts, I talk about sexy knights with awesome torsos and fabulous swords. Take that any way you want. Swords are representative, you know what I mean. So so I've been writing, oh my gosh, for 30 years. And I have people ask me what has endeared me to historical medieval England. And it honestly, the first book I ever read in that genre was Virginia Henley. And if you've all read Virginia Henley, or if anybody's read Virginia Henley, you know what I'm talking about. She has this amazing talent for bringing the medieval period alive. And when I read it, I thought, that's it. You know, this is what I'm meant to do. So like I said, I just published my 107th medieval historical romance novel set in England. And it is, you know, I've heard the term, I think it was Marianne said that history is her jam. Medieval England's definitely my jam, and it has been for a very long time. And I think it's such an exciting era. I really, really love it. And that's why I'm here. So.
Great, thanks. And CD.
Hey everyone, how are you? I'm talking to you from New Jersey. Wow, I can't believe I'm even on this panel. You guys are all fabulous. And thank you for including me. I write mostly paranormal romance and urban fantasy. I have one, what you could call a typical historical genre. It is the prequel for all of my paranormal romance. It's where the pack began, so to speak, for my werewolves. And that's set during the Renaissance in Ireland. It's pretty cool. It's pretty interesting. All of my werewolf packs are actually based on a sort of folklore that I read about wolves. It's all set in church history. These are called Hounds of God, and I do use a lot of that as a basis for my werewolves. So it's not, traditional, just in the time. It's more, I'm kind of rambling, I'm sorry. I have a 1,000-year-old werewolf, and he is dealing a lot with a curse based in church history again. That's actually based on fact. I do a lot of research. I really like information. I really like history, and I'm really happy to be here. So thank you.
Great, thanks. So I'm just going to have a quick look at the chat, and I want to invite all the viewers to go ahead and post questions and comments. This is your chance to interact with the authors. We have lots of people saying hello. And Jenny Strach commented, "Hello, ladies. I started reading romance series with Joanna Lindsay, the Mallory series." And Ian Ali says, "Love the medieval period and am enamored with Scotland, bucket list location." So yeah, if anyone has any questions, go ahead and post them in the chat, and we'll come back to those. So I'll go to the next question. Everyone talked a little bit about some of their historical fiction experience, and I'd just like you to expand on that a little more. Go a little deeper with it, as far as you want. So I'll go back to Marianne.
Okay. Hi, I'm back. To expand a little bit, but what goes hand in hand for me with the love of history is travel. I was blessed in my life that I started traveling as a small child with my parents and my family. And it's something that has stayed with me my whole life. So when I went to Ireland last summer, it gave birth to a Blood and Magic. There's so many other places that I have been I'm not just a mental traveler when it comes to the history in my stories. Most of them, I can't say all. There was a time when I could say all, but not all of them are places that I have actually physically been myself. Most of them, yes. But when I wrote Condemned, which is what I showed you the picture of before, and I don't know, Kathryn's book came up face forward. Mine are coming up backwards. I don't know why. Maybe it's the view that I'm in. I don't know.
Yours are okay for us.
It is okay because I'm showing it's like written like like I'm
yeah, no, we can see it.
Black magic here. It's that takes place in France, which I've been, but then medieval France, which I wasn't in medieval France, but I've been into France. But it also takes place mostly in the Holy Land because it did take place in the Crusades, and that is a bucket list place for me if the world ever gets safe enough for us to go. And it just every ounce of research that went into, and every person that I spoke to about it. I have family members who have gone multiple times, and I picked their brains and I looked at their pictures and I had them describe what the air felt like on their skin, what the smells were like, what the feel of the water in the red, in the Dead Sea felt like as they were floating, what they sold in the gift shop, because I wanted to take myself and put myself there so that what I gave my readers was something that was true. But in doing so, it just sparked even more fire for the history of the place. And that's how I can expand on it, is that it's through travel that my love of history has been just expanded beyond.
Thank you. Hildie.
Okay, well, my love of history as well. I loved world history when I was in high school. That's my favorite subject. And I think one of the things that made me get into and really enjoy Highlanders was that I always fantasize about, I don't know, it just seems so romantic to me. And I've always wanted to know a little bit more of what happened, behind the scenes. So no matter what series I read, whether it was Beatrice Moscow O'Malley, or I love Brenda Joyce's Masters of Time. I don't know if any of you read that, and she never finished that series.
Yeah.
But anyway, just wanting to know what else happened behind the scenes. And I just fell in love with that era. I did go to Scotland because I had to. And this was even before I wrote my first medieval Scottish romance. And I just traipsing through those old castles and seeing all that, and just fell in love with the country. I plan to go back. I think that one of the things that attracts you to a specific genre is sometimes your background, sometimes things that happen in your past and before, and maybe a movie you watched that stuck with you, or a certain character trait, and then you turn it around to be that hero or a heroine that you want to know more about, and so you start writing that. I mean, for me, it has always been the alpha heroes that are so alpha that you almost want to not like them, but then there's something about them, and that there's a reason for that bravado. And I think to me, the alpha Highlander just encompasses all that, and and cowboys do too, because they're the Highlanders of the West. But I think that's it. The historical aspect, of course, is to me just like the icing on the cake, because I get to go back and research all that and find out more about their lives back then. And to me, it's all encompassing. It's all fun, but mostly the richness of the history. Yep, that's all I have to say about that.
Thanks. Caroline, you're next.
Okay. You see how fast I got that turned off? I'm so proud of myself. Okay, I'm going to expand on the history idea. My master's was in social history, and social history is the study of lives people led instead of the events which shape their lives. So you don't study this happened, then this happened, then this happened. We study what people ate for dinner, what they likely believed, how their day was structured, how different chores were divided between the sexes, that sort of thing. And that allows you to really put your mind in the time period. Now, one of my things that I say often is that historical fiction is applied social history. So you have social history, you're learning all of this, and then you apply it by writing historical fiction, right? I mean, you choose the life of somebody famous where we know the events which shape their life, but we don't know what they ate for dinner on a particular day, that kind of thing. And we write historical fiction. Well, I believe that what we're doing is a version of historical fiction. I think it's the best version of historical fiction. I think historical romance is the best kind of historical fiction because it always ends happily ever after. And that's kind of important to me when I read. You know, lots of historical fiction doesn't, because not all history was great. Anyhow, that's the reason I write historical romance. I don't have anything more to add that Hildie and the others haven't said already about how amazing it is to look at the Scottish history or the medieval history, to really immerse yourself in it, to place yourself in it. I just, coming at it from a social history point of view, it's kind of neat to say, listen, I know what the top 8 meals would have been. I know how their day would have been structured. I know how the chores would have been divided. So let's build a story from that. And one of the things I like doing is taking what we expect and what was expected at the time and flipping it. I like writing really badass heroines and the heroes who love them. So maybe that's not exactly typical for the period, but now that we know our social history, we can manipulate it, and that's what makes it fun.
Great, thanks. Kathryn.
You know, it's really fascinating to me to listen to these authors talk about their perception and their views on historical romance and historical fiction. And I'm going to expand a little bit on what Caroline said about historical romance being historical fiction, because it is. I mean, it really is. But to me, historical romance humanizes historical fiction. You know, it gives it a heart, it gives it emotion, it gives it something that readers can relate to. So for me personally, my love for history started very, very early. My mother is a teacher and she has a history degree. So I was always surrounded by, you know, historical books and things like that. So my love for history started very, very early. Everybody asks me, well, what is it about the medieval period that just appeals to you? And specifically medieval England, because there's a real definitive line between the Highlanders and the Scottish and the English knights. I mean, there's a line there. They really don't blend, and I think some people don't really realize that. They think medieval and they think Highlanders. Well, no. I mean, you had your knights in shining armor. You had your Disney fairy tales that grew up. You know, that's what we write right now. We write basically fairy tales, knight in shining armor, that kind of thing. But my love for medieval England, like I say, it came when I read Virginia Henley's book. And I read all of her books. And what was so cool to me was a few years ago, I was able to meet her and talk to her and, you know, did the whole fangirl thing. Oh my God, you got me started in this, you know, the whole thing, which was just so cool. And I think that's one of the things about, I'm kind of veering off the subject a little bit, but that's one of the things about publishing right now is that it makes the reader and the author so much closer, whereas 20, 30 years ago that wasn't the case, you know. So it's very, very you know, we can talk to them, we can interact with them. It's really cool. But anyway, back to medieval England. I did travel to England in 2008. I'm not a huge traveler, but we did go in 2008, and I went to several castles and with my husband, and it's so funny because he does not have that love for history that I do. So I'm going to these castles and I'm doing everything but licking the stones. You know, you're putting your hands on them and you're hugging them and you know, you're just like absorbing this. And he's like, it's just a pile of stones. And I'm like, no, you don't get it. You don't get it. I look at these stones and I see the people that lived here. I smell what they're cooking. I smell the crap from the kitchen yard. You know, it's like everything, I just absorb it. And my degree actually is in business. I have a degree in business with a minor in human services. But that love of history is just such a part of me. And, you know, when people ask me why, it's difficult to explain, but it's part of my fabric. And it's just something that has always fascinated me and will always fascinate me. So I just have a huge, huge love for history, even though I don't have a degree in it, Caroline. She's like, I'm sorry. But so that's the best way I can describe it. It's just a passion for me more than anything else.
Great, thank you. CD.
Hey, everyone. So for me, because I mainly write paranormal romance, I think the history mostly comes in when I'm doing research. And it's kind of cool because people typically assume, at least they do, you know, people who email me or just talk to me about writing paranormal romance, that I'm just kind of pulling ideas, you know, out of my head and making it up, which I think any writing, you know, requires imagination and creativity. But I actually do spend a lot of time on research. And one of the first things I did before I started writing my urban fantasy young adult series is I looked up the first case of a werewolf, which was around 1590, and it was really interesting. It was like a wealthy farmer guy, and he had been accused of some really bad things, and his whole excuse was, "Hey, I did this because, you know, I'm a werewolf. I can't help it." And I thought it was great. I thought it was interesting. It was really tremendous reading. You know, there was a whole book that someone wrote about him in like 1920 that was also really kind of cool. And, you know, it's very, very old, and I enjoyed it. I liked the history part. And, you know, to make fantasy, to make anything really believable, I think you have to have some facts to back it up. And I love that part of my job as a writer, as a storyteller. I like to be able to go and look things up and to pull it into my own fantasy world. And so, you know, that as a reader, hey, where did she get this idea from? And she can look it up, or he can look it up, and, you know, it's there. It's written. It's in our past. And, you know, it's kind of special and it's kind of cool, and it makes my job fun. I love it.
Great, thanks. So we're just going to go over to the chat again. There's a few questions. D. Hart is asking, have you ever trained with swords? So we'll go with Marianne.
Okay. Fun fact about me is I am, well, you wouldn't know it to look at me now, you know, with the jiggle, but I am a second-degree black belt. And so I have trained with all various different types of weaponry, including swords, not broadswords or long swords, but short, small, long, you know, daggery type sword, blades. And the training wasn't so much on the attack as it was on the defensive. So the answer is yes. And, you know, most of us, though, if we haven't had any, you know, haven't held a weapon in our hands, whether it's a Japanese bow staff or nunchucks or a sword or a hatchet or even a gun, we'll do a ton of research on it. So yes, and I just have to, I'd have to say to Kathryn, oh my God, yes, with the castles, you know, just licking the walls. I mean, I sat there in Bunratty Castle this past, you know, this summer, and just sat in one of the tables where they allowed people to sit and take pictures, and just stared, because around me, it was people were just hosts of people were just walking around. And I know that sounds witchy, and I know it sounds crazy, but that's all part of the creative temperament. So yeah, girl, I'm with you. So that's my answer is yes and no. Yes for the blades and every other kind of weapon. So yes.
Great. Hildie?
I'm ex-military, so I've held all kinds of weapons. My favorite was the throwing of a grenade, because I couldn't throw it very far, so that was kind of scary. It's like, whoa! But I did train hand to hand, but never with the sword. I think the Army needs to start sword training. We never know. And I have gone to Scotland and also did everything but lick the stones. Oh my gosh, I could just stay there forever. My friends are like, we're so hungry. I'm like, wait, just give me one more minute.
If you would just lick the stones, you wouldn't be as hungry.
Exactly, I try to tell them that. So, anyway,
Exactly.
yeah, but I wish that we would have been trained with swords. That would have been amazing, but I guess not yet.
We all
Right.
I've done some sword fighting with HEMA, the Historical European Martial Arts, which is a circuit of competitions, at least here in America. I did some private lessons 2 years ago. I have one of those. I've got 3 kids, and one of them is one of those kids that's like, I don't want to do anything but video games. And I said, listen, whatever you want to do, I will find a way. I'll make it happen. I'll get you a lesson. He's like, how about sword fighting? I'm like, done. I called him on it. He's like, shoot, now I have to do sword fighting. I got a tutor. He came out here. He would come to our house. He would teach both of us all sorts of broadsword and longsword techniques. It was really interesting. And I learned a lot about the history of weaponry and the history of armor and what the armor would be useful for. Do it. It's HEMA, is Historical European Martial Arts, and this is the local group, and I got the main instructor to come out because my son was too young to go do the group lessons, and it was so cool. Like we talked about how come with a broadsword you attack the head. You know, why not talk about the center of mass? Why not talk about the broader range here? You know, like in the military. And he pointed out, because if you stab a guy in the chest and he doesn't die immediately, you're still within sword's range of his sword. So hit him really hard in the head so that he doesn't get back up again. And I was like, brilliant! That's wonderful.
Yeah, that sounds so cool. That is just so cool.
Right.
It's the same principle with nunchucks too. You know, when you're spinning to whack and hit somebody very quickly, so that you get the most bang for your buck in short range. And then why do you think there's a front kick or a jump front kick in martial arts? It's not to stun; it's to create distance between you and your opponent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Can't kill them. You have to disable them so they can't kill you.
Stun and run.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How about you, Kathryn?
You know, I actually have never done any formal training, but I have a collection of beautiful swords, and you can kind of see them behind me. I have a very big one right here. I have a gigantic one right here. Very, very big. I have done much research on sword fighting and tactics and medieval military history. So yeah, I know the tactics of pretty much every battle out there, but I have never actually done it myself. I'm just a student of it, not an expert. So, an expert enough to write about it. But I can tell you those swords are incredibly heavy. And this is an authentically made sword.
Swing it, Kathryn, swing it.
I know, right? But it's made by a Spanish company who's been around for 700 years. So this thing weighs probably 20 pounds, 25 pounds. It's really heavy. So you can imagine those things coming at you at battle. But what's cool about this, it has a little dagger in the hill. The broadsword doesn't get him. You get the dagger.